My mother actually looked me up and down at my own graduation and said, "At least she is smart, because beauty definitely skipped her." The whole family laughed. They called me the ugly duckling and buried me like I never existed. I left home that day with exactly $495 to my name and never looked back. 14 years later, I walked into my sister's pre-wedding cookout in a chauffeured Maybach. And before the weekend was over, her billionaire groom asked one single question that destroyed her entire life in front of everyone. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to prove your toxic family wrong. The Hampton estate my mother rented for Chloe's pre-wedding cookout was exactly what you would expect from Brenda. Ostentatious, loud, and entirely designed to make people think we came from generational wealth instead of decades of crippling credit card debt. The heavy iron gates stood wide open to welcome guests, the scent of expensive barbecue drifting down the immaculate driveway. I sat in the back of my chauffeured Maybach, smoothing the fabric of my custom silk trousers. I was 36 years old, the founder of Melanin Crown, a global beauty empire, and I was about to crash the party of the decade. My driver pulled the sleek black car right up to the front patio, where a crowd of aunts, uncles, and cousins were already mingling with cocktails. The heavy car door swung open, and I stepped out into the sticky afternoon heat. I wore oversized designer sunglasses, and my natural hair was styled in a flawless, voluminous halo of curls. The yard went completely silent. Through the tinted lenses, I saw my mother Brenda marching toward me. She was wearing a perfectly tailored white jumpsuit, her skin heavily powdered to look lighter, her hair pressed bones straight as always. She did not recognize me yet. She just saw a black woman with natural hair stepping onto her pristine rented driveway. "Delivery drivers use the back entrance," Brenda snapped, waving a manicured hand as if shooing away a stray dog. "We do not have spare change for you here, so drop whatever you brought by the service door and move this car before the real guests arrive." I took a slow, deliberate breath. I reached up and pulled my sunglasses down, meeting her furious gaze directly. The color drained from her face so fast, I thought she might actually faint. Her mouth fell open, her eyes widening as she took in my face, the same dark skin she used to mock now glowing and immaculate. "Maya," she gasped, stumbling back a step. The shock only lasted a second before her familiar venom returned, completely replacing her initial surprise. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, stepping closer so the other guests could not hear. "Are you still wearing the rags you bought with that $495 you left with 14 years ago?" The cruelty in her voice was exactly the same as it had been on my graduation day. The day she mocked my appearance so relentlessly in front of our extended family that I packed a single duffel bag and walked out the door with nothing but my part-time bakery wages. She had not called me once in 14 years. Not to ask if I was hungry, not to ask if I was safe. I looked around the rented mansion, taking in the rented luxury cars and the rented silverware. "I came to see if you are enjoying the life you built after you threw me out," I replied calmly. My voice did not shake. The scared, insecure teenager she remembered was long gone. In her place stood a woman who routinely negotiated $100 million acquisition deals before breakfast. Before Brenda could fire back, the heavy glass doors of the patio slid open. Out strutted Chloe, my older sister, the undisputed golden child of the family. At 34, she still looked like the pageant queen Brenda had meticulously engineered her to be. Her skin was significantly lighter than mine, a fact Brenda praised daily during our childhood, and her hair cascaded down her back in expensive silky extensions. Chloe stopped dead in her tracks when she saw me. She looked me up and down, her eyes narrowing as she assessed my outfit. Instead of recognizing the quality of the silk, she laughed. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," Chloe announced, her voice carrying across the lawn. "I cannot believe you actually showed up here, Maya. What is wrong? Did your little part-time job stop paying enough? Are you here to beg for some of the wedding catering?" She walked up and stood next to Brenda, folding her arms. "And look at that hair. You still refuse to tame that mess, I see. I guess some people never learn how to present themselves in polite society. Nice knockoff bag, by the way." Did you find it at a thrift store? I did not flinch. I just smiled, letting her dig her own grave. Chloe always needed an audience, and she was playing right into the role she had perfected since we were kids. The beautiful superior sister putting the ugly duckling back in her place. You really should not have come here, Maya. Chloe continued, flipping her extensions over her shoulder. This weekend is all about my future. Julian's family is going to be here soon, and they are true high society. Julian is a brilliant venture capitalist. He is a billionaire. He is going to elevate this entire family to a tax bracket you cannot even comprehend. We cannot have you lingering around looking like a desperate charity case and embarrassing us in front of a wealthy white billionaire. Now get out of my sight before I call security. My mother looked me up and down at my graduation and said, "At least she is smart, because beauty definitely skipped her." My entire family laughed. I left home that day with exactly $495 and never looked back. 14 years later, I walked into my sister's pre-wedding cookout in a chauffeured Maybach. Before the weekend was over, her billionaire groom asked one single question that destroyed her entire life in front of everyone. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to prove your toxic family wrong. A voice cuts through the music. The head caterer marches up to Brenda and Chloe holding a credit card terminal like a weapon. "Excuse me, ladies," the caterer says loudly, ignoring the etiquette my mother prizes. "We have a problem." Chloe rolls her eyes, tossing her extensions over her shoulder. "Keep your voice down," Chloe hisses. "What is it?" The caterer does not lower her voice. "Your card declined. All three of them. The $15,000 balance needs to be settled right now, or my crew is packing up the grills and taking the food." The chatter among the aunties and uncles stops dead. Every eye turns toward Chloe and Brenda. I stand there adjusting my sunglasses, enjoying a front row seat to this absolute disaster. Chloe's light skin turns a blotchy shade of red. She fumbles frantically with her designer clutch. "That is impossible," Chloe stammers, her voice cracking. "It must be a fraud alert. My bank is strict about large purchases. They lock premium luxury accounts for my protection." Brenda steps in quickly, desperately trying to maintain her illusion. She claps her hands together with a strained laugh. "Yes, just a simple bank error. Do not make a scene. We are joining the Sterling family. Do you know who Julian is?" The caterer crosses her arms. "The terminal says severe delinquency, ma'am. That means unpaid bills. I need cash, a working credit card, or we are leaving right now." The aunts and uncles murmur. Auntie Denise whispers about how Chloe always lived beyond her means to trap a rich man. Brenda glares at the crowd, desperate to regain control. "Let me try my card," Brenda says, pulling a card from her wallet with visibly shaking hands. The caterer swipes it. The machine gives an angry beep. "Declined," the caterer announces flatly, showing no mercy. Brenda's jaw drops. She frantically hands over another card. "Declined again." Chloe looks like she is about to cry real tears. Julian's venture capital money is their only lifeline, and this bill will expose their fraudulent lifestyle. "Just give us 10 minutes. Brenda pleads, her arrogant tone evaporating into sheer desperation. "I will call the bank right now. I will get it sorted out. Please just wait." I let the silence stretch before I make my move. I reach into my purse. I do not dig or fumble. I calmly pull out a sleek, heavy piece of solid metal. An American Express Centurion card. The infamous black card reserved only for the ultra-wealthy. I step right forward, my heels clicking against the stone patio, and hold the card out to the caterer. "Run this," I say, my voice smooth and composed. "Put my family's debt on this. I would not want my sister to starve on her big weekend." Chloe gasps, loudly staring at the heavy black titanium in my hand, as if it is an alien artifact. Brenda looks as if she has just seen a terrifying ghost. The caterer takes the card, her demeanor instantly shifting to respect. She inserts it into the terminal. It approves instantly without a beep of hesitation. The caterer hands the card back to me with a polite nod. "Thank you, Mom. We will continue serving immediately." She turns and marches back to the outdoor kitchen, leaving my family in shock. The patio remains dead silent. My mother and sister are paralyzed by the sudden bailout. They are humiliated beyond belief, realizing the daughter they threw out like trash just paid their debt without blinking an eye. But they are also too greedy to reject the money. They need this wedding to happen. Brenda tries to recover her shattered pride, lifting her chin and smoothing her white jumpsuit. Well, Brenda says, her voice shaking very slightly. It is about time you contributed something to this family. Consider it payback for the roof I kept over your head all those years. I let out a soft laugh. Payback. I think about the scholarship money she stole from me, the freezing nights I slept in a bus station while she bought Chloe a new car just for being pretty. Oh, we are definitely going to talk about payback, I say, my tone dropping to a whisper. Before I can finish my sentence, the double doors of the mansion swing wide open. A tall, sharply dressed white man steps out onto the patio. Julian. He has a crystal wine glass in his hand and a relaxed smile on his face, clearly coming outside to greet the entire family. He looks at Chloe, then at Brenda, and finally his eyes land on me. He stops dead in his tracks. The relaxed smile vanishes from his face instantly. The bright color drains from his cheeks, leaving him pale. His hand goes completely slack. The crystal wine glass slips from his fingers and shatters violently against the hard stone patio, red wine splashing everywhere like spilled blood. Chloe jumps rushing forward to grab his arm. Julian, babe, are you feeling okay? But Julian does not even look at his fiancée. He stares directly at me, his eyes wide with absolute shock and undeniable deep professional respect. He takes a shaky breath and gasps out loud for the entire family to hear. Director Maya, what on earth are you doing here? The silence that followed Julian's words was so absolute that I could hear the wind rustling through the massive oak trees lining the estate. Director Maya. The title hung in the humid afternoon air, heavy and undeniable. The rich red wine continued to pool around his expensive leather shoes, but Julian did not seem to notice. His eyes were locked on me wide with a mixture of absolute shock and professional reverence. For a fraction of a second, nobody moved. Then the sheer panic broke through Chloe's perfectly contoured face. Her eyes darted wildly from Julian to me, and the light peachy complexion she was so proud of suddenly drained of all color. She lunged forward, her high heels clicking frantically against the stone patio. She grabbed Julian by the bicep, her manicured nails digging into the fabric of his tailored suit jacket with desperate force. "Babe, you are so confused right now," Chloe shrieked, letting out a high-pitched, nervous laugh that sounded more like a dying bird than a bride-to-be. She yanked his arm, trying to physically turn him away from me. "This is just my estranged sister, Maya. She is just a cleaning lady. You must have mixed up her name with someone else from your office. It is the heat, baby. You are working yourself to the bone." Julian did not budge easily. He planted his feet, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. He looked at the heavy black American Express Centurion card, still resting casually between my fingers, and then looked back at Chloe's frantic, sweating face. "Chloe, I do not think I am confused," Julian said, his voice steady, but laced with a sudden sharp suspicion. "I know exactly who Director Maya is. My firm has been trying to secure a pitch meeting with her holding company for the last 6 months. She is the founder of the Melanin Crown Corporation." "Come inside right now and drink some water," Chloe interrupted violently, her voice pitching up an octave into sheer hysteria. She threw her entire body weight into pulling him toward the mansion doors, completely ignoring what he had just said. "You are hallucinating from the sun. We need to get you cooled down before the evening rehearsal dinner. It is just my sister. A nobody. Please, Julian, come inside." Julian allowed himself to be dragged toward the glass doors, but his eyes never left mine. He was a self-made billionaire and a brilliant venture capitalist. Men like him did not build empires by ignoring massive red flags. He saw the black card, he saw the custom silk trousers, he saw the Maybach idling in the driveway. And he clearly saw the stark contrast between the desperate lying woman clutching his arm and the calm, collected woman standing by the catering tent. The heavy glass doors slid shut behind them, cutting off the rest of his questions. The moment they disappeared into the house, Brenda rounded on me. The shock had completely worn off, replaced by a vicious, unhinged fury. She stomped across the patio, her face contorted with the same bitter rage she had directed at me my entire life. The catering staff quickly dispersed, sensing the incoming explosion, while the aunties and uncles leaned in closer, hungry for the drama. "What kind of sick game are you playing?" Brenda hissed, stopping just inches from my face. Her voice trembled with rage. "You think you can rent a fancy car, steal some rich man's credit card, and come here to ruin your sister's life?" I calmly slipped the black card back into my designer bag, completely unfazed by her hostility. "I did not steal anything, Brenda. That card has my name on it, and I just saved your golden child from being publicly exposed as a fraud in front of her wealthy in-laws. You should be thanking me." "Thanking you," Brenda spat, stepping even closer. "You have always been a jealous, spiteful little brat. You could never stand the fact that Chloe was beautiful and light and meant for greatness while you were just an embarrassment. You always have to steal her spotlight. Just like when you purposely wore your hair in that huge nappy afro to her sweet 16 party just to embarrass me in front of my friends. You have always been a dark cloud hanging over this family." Her words, steeped in the same colorous toxicity I had endured for 18 years, rolled right off my shoulders. The old Maya would have shrunk away, internalizing the insults, wondering why her own mother despised her natural features so much. But the woman standing on that patio had built a billion-dollar beauty empire specifically celebrating the exact same melanin and curls Brenda found so offensive. Her insults held absolutely no power over me anymore. "I am not here to steal her spotlight," I replied, my voice smooth and dangerously calm. "I am just here to watch the show." "You listen to me very carefully," Brenda growled, pointing a trembling finger at my chest. "I do not know what kind of scam you are running, or how you tricked Julian into thinking you are some important director. But you are going to keep your mouth shut. Julian is Chloe's ticket out of this miserable city. He is going to elevate this entire family. I will not let your ugly, bitter presence ruin her future. You are going to stay out of sight for the rest of this weekend. You will not speak to Julian. You will not look at Julian. If you insist on staying here, you will remain in the shadows where you belong. Do you understand me?" I looked at her trembling finger, then up at her furious, desperate face. I reached over to a passing waiter's tray and picked up a crystal flute of sparkling water. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the silence stretch, until Brenda looked ready to spontaneously combust. I simply smiled, the corners of my mouth lifting into a predatory curve. "Oh, do not worry about me, Mother," I said, keeping my tone perfectly pleasant as I looked directly into her eyes. "I am going to be on my absolute best behavior. In fact, you can count on it. I would not miss the upcoming events for the world." The evening air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and roasted garlic by the time I arrived at the rehearsal dinner. The venue was a five-star rooftop restaurant overlooking the city skyline, booked entirely for Chloe and Julian's guests. Crystal chandeliers hung low over tables draped in heavy white linen. Julian's family, the Sterlings, occupied the center of the room, exuding the kind of quiet old money wealth that made Brenda sweat with desperation. I walked through the mahogany double doors, wearing a tailored emerald green slip dress. It was understated but cut from silk so fine it moved like liquid. Chloe was clinging to Julian's arm near the ice sculpture, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Julian looked distracted, his gaze scanning the crowd as if searching for someone. I knew exactly who he was looking for. Before I could take another step into the main dining area, Brenda intercepted me. She had changed into a beaded gown that screamed new money and wore a strained, frantic smile. She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails biting into my skin, and yanked me toward the back of the restaurant. We bypassed the beautiful centerpieces, bypassed the floor-to-ceiling windows, and kept walking until we reached the swinging metal doors of the kitchen. Hidden behind a massive floral arrangement was a single cramped folding table. It was stripped bare of the fine linen covering the other tables. The chauffeurs, the event coordinators, and the nannies for the Sterling family were quietly eating their meals there, keeping out of sight. Brenda stopped and shoved me toward the folding chairs. She did not bother to lower her voice. In fact, she raised it, ensuring the wealthy guests at the nearby tables could hear every single syllable. "College dropouts sit at the back," Brenda announced loudly, a vicious smirk twisting her powdered face. "We cannot let her embarrass Julian's high-class family. This table is for the hired help, which is exactly where someone with your background belongs. Take a seat, Maya, and stay out of the way." A few of the Sterling relatives turned their heads, their expressions a mix of confusion and polite horror. Chloe smirked from across the room, raising her champagne glass in my direction. Brenda stood tall, puffing out her chest, genuinely believing she had just put me in my place and secured her own elevated status. I looked at the cramped table, then back at my mother. The sheer audacity of her insult was almost impressive. She called me a college dropout as if it were a moral failing on my part. As if I had chosen to leave my chemistry program because I lacked ambition. She conveniently left out the truth of why I never finished that degree. During my sophomore year, I had secured a partial academic scholarship. I worked 2 jobs waiting tables and scrubbing bakery floors to save the remaining $5,000 for my tuition. I kept the money in a joint account my mother had access to from when I was a minor. 2 days before the tuition deadline, I logged in to find the balance at zero. Brenda had drained every single penny. When I confronted her crying and begging for my tuition money back, she did not even flinch. She told me Chloe needed a new wardrobe for the Miss Regional pageant and a down payment on a Mercedes to look the part of a winner. Brenda had literally looked me in the eye and told me that Chloe's beauty was an investment while my chemistry degree was a waste of time. She stole my future to fund Chloe's vanity, forcing me to drop out of school, pack my bags, and leave with the $495 I had in my pocket. And now, 14 years later, she was using that exact trauma as a punchline to impress a room full of white billionaires. I did not scream. I did not throw a drink in her face. I simply looked at her, my expression completely unbothered. "You are absolutely right, Brenda," I said, my voice smooth and carrying just enough for the nearest tables to catch my words. "People who steal from their own children to fund beauty pageants definitely belong at the head table. Enjoy your meal." Brenda's smug smile faltered, her eyes darting nervously toward the Sterling family to see if they had heard. I did not give her a chance to respond. I turned my back on her and walked directly to the small folding table. I pulled out a metal chair and sat down right between a uniformed chauffeur and a tired-looking nanny holding a sleeping toddler. Brenda huffed, spun around, and hurried back to her VIP seat, desperate to do damage control and fawn over Julian's mother. I settled into my metal chair and smiled brightly at my table mates. They were staring at me, clearly uncomfortable with the drama they had just witnessed. The chauffeur, an older black man with a kind face, cleared his throat and slid a breadbasket toward me. "I am so sorry about that, miss," he murmured quietly. "You do not have to sit back here with us." I took a piece of bread and took a bite, chewing happily. "Are you kidding me?" I said, leaning in like we were old friends. "This is the best seat in the house. The food is exactly the same and the company is infinitely better. I am Maya, by the way." The tension at the small table immediately dissolved. The nanny let out a soft laugh, adjusting the sleeping baby on her shoulder. "I am Sarah," she whispered. "And this man is Marcus." I spent the next hour having the time of my life. I learned that Marcus had been driving for the Sterlings for years and knew every secret about their empire. I truly enjoyed every single brilliant second of that lovely evening. While I truly enjoyed the lively company at the staff table, I knew I had a mission to execute. The main dining area buzzed with the polite chatter of old money. Brenda was holding court at the head table, aggressively laughing at every joke Julian's father made. Chloe sat beside Julian, hanging onto his arm. Julian, however, looked completely disengaged. He stared blankly at his untouched steak. How was a man who built his fortune by analyzing details, and right now he looked bored by the superficial spectacle my mother orchestrated. I decided it was the perfect moment to drop my next piece of bait. I reached across the cramped folding table to grab the heavy glass water pitcher. As I extended my arm, I deliberately let the loose silk sleeve of my emerald green dress slide down toward my elbow. Resting against my dark skin was a Patek Philippe Grand Complications watch. It was a spectacular limited edition timepiece crafted from solid rose gold, featuring a perpetual calendar and a moon phase dial. The retail value sat comfortably at $250,000. It was not the kind of watch you could fake. The rose gold caught the overhead light, flashing a brilliant reflection across the room. From the corner of my eye, I watched the exact moment the light hit Julian. He was a notorious watch collector. He had famously given an interview stating that you could tell everything about a person's business acumen by the timepiece they chose to wear. His head snapped up. He squinted his gaze, locking onto my wrist. He sat up completely straight, the boredom vanishing from his features. I slowly poured water into Marcus the chauffeur's glass, keeping my wrist elevated just long enough for Julian to verify what he was looking at. I pulled my arm back, let my sleeve fall, and casually took a sip of my drink. At the head table, Julian abruptly stood up. Chloe immediately grabbed his hand, her face contorting with panic as she asked him where he was going. Julian gently but firmly pried her fingers off his suit jacket. He navigated his way through the maze of white linen tables, heading straight for the swinging kitchen doors. The cheerful conversation at my small folding table halted immediately. Marcus and Sarah, the nanny, stiffened as the billionaire groom approached our discarded corner. Julian ignored them entirely. He stopped right beside my metal chair, his towering frame casting a shadow over the cheap table. He stared down at me, analyzing my face, my silk dress, and my wrist. "Excuse me," Julian said, his voice deep and commanding. "I could not help but notice your watch from across the room. That is a Patek Philippe reference 5208, is it not?" I looked up at him, feigning mild surprise. I offered him a polite corporate smile. "You have an excellent eye for horology, Julian." "Yes, it is. A gift to myself after a successful quarter." Julian frowned, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "Chloe told me you operate a small cleaning business," he stated, his tone probing. "That is a $250,000 timepiece. That is an impressive acquisition for a residential cleaner." I let out a soft laugh, resting my chin on my hand. "I suppose Chloe oversimplified my profession. I do not clean houses, Julian. I clean up toxic corporate assets. I acquire failing companies, restructure their chemical manufacturing processes, strip out the inefficiencies, and scale them for global distribution. It requires heavy lifting, so you could call it a cleaning business if you lack the vocabulary for venture capitalism." Julian inhaled sharply. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He was staring at an equal, not a subordinate. The specific financial terminology I used completely shattered the pathetic lie Chloe had spun. "You are in mergers and acquisitions?" he asked, pulling out an empty chair and sitting down right there at the staff table. "What sector do you specialize in?" "Cosmetic chemistry and biotechnology," I answered smoothly. "We identify promising but underfunded laboratories, inject capital, and patent proprietary formulas. The return on investment has been staggering this year, hence the watch." Julian leaned in, completely captivated. He began firing off complex questions about supply chain logistics and equity distribution. I answered every single one, flawlessly matching his intellect and challenging his assumptions. We were deep in a high-level business discussion. Julian was fascinated. He had spent the evening surrounded by vapid socialites, and he finally found someone worth talking to. Suddenly, a frantic clicking of heels echoed across the hardwood floor. Chloe was practically sprinting across the restaurant, her heavy beaded gown swishing violently around her legs. Her face was flushed dark red and she was sweating profusely. She launched herself between Julian and me, physically wedging her body into the small space to block his view. "Babe, what are you doing back here?" Chloe gasped, letting out a high-pitched, hysterical laugh. She grabbed Julian by the shoulders, trying to pull him up from the metal chair. "You cannot be bothering the hired help. We have guests waiting to toast to our future." Julian did not stand up. He looked at Chloe, his expression hardening into cold suspicion. "We were just discussing your sister's business, Chloe. You told me she swept floors for a living." Chloe panicked, her eyes darting to my wrist. She let out another frantic, breathless laugh. "Oh, she is just telling stories, babe. She sweeps floors at a warehouse, and that watch is completely fake. She buys knockoffs from street vendors just to look rich. Please, Julian, come back to our table." I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I just sat back in my metal chair, took a slow sip of my water, and smiled directly at Julian, letting Chloe's pathetic lie hang in the heavy air between us. Julian stared at my wrist, his brilliant, analytical mind working fast. He knew the difference between a cheap street replica and a genuine rose gold perpetual calendar. He opened his mouth to challenge Chloe's ridiculous fabrication, but my sister was already moving. Panic gave her an unnatural, desperate strength. Her manicured fingers clamped down on my bare bicep like a vice, her acrylic nails digging sharply into my dark skin. "Excuse us for just one tiny second, babe," Chloe chirped. Her voice was pitched unnaturally high, vibrating with an incredibly thin layer of forced cheerfulness. "Sisterly bonding time. Be right back." She practically yanked me out of my metal folding chair. I did not resist. I let her drag me away from the staff table. I wanted to see exactly how far she would unravel once she felt completely cornered. We maneuvered rapidly through the chaotic maze of rushing catering staff and heavy velvet curtains, until we reached the women's powder room located at the far, quiet end of the restaurant hallway. The moment the heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind us, sealing us off from the extravagant party, the panicked bride completely vanished. The vicious monster I grew up with immediately took her place. Chloe shoved me hard against the cold marble vanity, her flawless bridal makeup unable to hide the sheer malice twisting her features. "Stay away from my billionaire," she hissed, her face contorting into a mask of pure, unfiltered venom. "I do not care what kind of insane delusion you have cooked up in your head, or what fake internet courses you took to sound smart in front of him. You are going to back off right now." I calmly brushed my green silk sleeve where her sweaty hands had grabbed me, maintaining my perfectly poised composure. Julian initiated the conversation, Chloe. "Maybe if you possess the intellectual capacity to discuss something other than designer handbags and superficial gossip, he would not have to seek out the hired help for basic mental stimulation." Her eyes flashed with the dangerous, volatile rage. She stepped directly into my personal space, pointing a violently trembling finger at my face. "You think you are so special now because you learned some big corporate words. Let me remind you exactly who you are, Maya. You are the same dark-skinned, ugly loser who used to cry in her bedroom because nobody wanted to take her to prom. You are the same nappy-haired freak mom had to hide upstairs when important company came over. You can put on a fancy dress and buy a fake shiny watch, but you are still just a massive embarrassment trying to ride my coattails." Her harsh colorist insults, the exact same weapons she and Brenda had constantly used to break my spirit as an insecure teenager, echoed sharply off the pristine marble walls. But they bounced off my emotional armor like harmless paper arrows. I leaned back against the counter, completely unfazed. "Riding your coattails. Chloe, your coattails are currently dragging through the mud. You could not even pay the basic catering bill this afternoon without my charity." The sudden mention of her hidden financial ruin pushed her completely over the edge. Her arrogant facade utterly shattered. "You do not know anything," she snarled, her voice dropping into a frantic, desperate whisper. "You think paying one single bill makes you a savior. That bill is pocket change. I owe people, Maya. Dangerous, unforgiving people. I am sitting on a mountain of debt so incredibly high it is literally choking me. Julian is my one and only ticket out of this nightmare. Once I have that diamond ring securely on my finger, his endless venture capital money will wipe my slate completely clean. He will pay off everything I owe without even noticing the cash is gone." I raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, genuinely amused by her pathetic confession. "So this great epic romance is just a calculated bailout strategy. You are actively planning to commit massive financial fraud against your own husband before the ink on the marriage license even dries." "It is not fraud, it is survival," she spat back, pacing the length of the powder room like a trapped animal. "I deserve this luxurious life. I am the beautiful one. I am the one meant for true high society. You are just a temporary stepping stone. So you are going to walk out of this bathroom, go back to your little folding table, and keep your mouth shut tight. If you say one single word to Julian about my ruined finances, or try to flirt with him again, I swear to God I will thoroughly destroy you." "You cannot destroy someone who is untouchable," I said smoothly, checking my dark red lipstick in the gold-framed mirror. "And frankly, Chloe, your intense desperation is showing. It is not a very good look for a blushing bride." "I will kill you," she shrieked, raising her hand high as if she was actually going to strike my face. Before her hand could make its violent downward arc, the heavy brass latch of the large handicap-accessible stall at the far end of the bathroom clicked loudly. The sudden sound was as sharp as a gunshot in the tense room. Chloe completely froze, her arm awkwardly suspended in midair. The heavy oak door slowly swung wide open. Out stepped Eleanor Sterling, Julian's mother. She was the living definition of intimidating old money. A strict, towering matriarch, dressed in an immaculate silver gown, her posture absolutely rigid with decades of generational wealth and undeniable societal power. She was the kind of woman who could ruin an entire family's social standing with a single disapproving glance. She had clearly been inside the stall the entire time. She had heard every single vile, desperate, and scheming word my sister had just screamed. Chloe's face drained of all remaining color. Her mouth opened and closed silently, her eyes wide with absolute suffocating terror. The golden child was entirely paralyzed, realizing her future mother-in-law had just heard her explicit plot to use Julian as a personal ATM to escape her massive debt. Mrs. Sterling. Chloe finally choked out, her voice trembling so violently it cracked. I can explain everything. That was just a silly, dramatic misunderstanding between sisters. Eleanor Sterling did not even blink in Chloe's direction. She looked right through my sister as if Chloe were nothing more than a disgusting smudge of dirt on the pristine marble floor. She walked with slow, deliberate purpose, completely bypassing the trembling bride. She stopped directly in front of me. The fierce, intimidating scowl on her face instantly melted into a radiant, wildly enthusiastic smile. She reached out with both hands, grabbing my right hand and shaking it vigorously. "Maya, good heavens!" Eleanor exclaimed, her voice echoing brightly against the vanity mirrors. "What an absolute honor to finally meet the woman holding 40% of our family firm's shares." Chloe let out a strangled gasp, her hands flying to her throat as if she were physically choking on the air. Eleanor Sterling did not even glance in her direction. The intimidating matriarch held my hand in a firm, warm grip, her sharp eyes mapping every detail of my face with absolute delight. "I have been telling Julian to arrange a formal introduction for months," Eleanor said, her tone carrying the casual authority of a woman who owned half of Manhattan. "When we saw your acquisition strategy for that failing chemical plant in Geneva, my husband and I were utterly blown away. It is a genuine thrill to have you here tonight." I offered her a polished, appreciative smile, matching her high society cadence perfectly. "The thrill is mine, Mrs. Sterling. I prefer to keep a low profile at family events, but I certainly could not pass up the opportunity to celebrate my sister." Eleanor finally turned her head just slightly, acknowledging Chloe out of the corner of her eye. The warmth vanished from her face, instantly replaced by a freezing, aristocratic, polite mask. Chloe shrank back against the marble vanity, her light skin turning a sickly shade of gray. She looked like a child caught stealing. "Yes, the sister," Eleanor murmured, her voice dripping with an icy undertone that made it clear she had heard every single vile word Chloe had screamed at me. "Well, we simply cannot have a major stakeholder and brilliant innovator hiding in the shadows. Come with me, Maya. You are sitting at the head table where you belong." Eleanor did not wait for a response. She linked her arm through mine and guided me out of the powder room, leaving my sister trembling alone by the sinks. The walk through the luxurious rooftop restaurant felt like a victory lap. Guests parted ways for Eleanor, their eyes tracking our movement as the powerful white matriarch escorted the dark-skinned woman in the emerald green dress directly to the center of the room. Julian was standing by his chair when we approached. The moment he saw his mother holding my arm, the puzzle pieces finally snapped together in his mind. The shock on his face gave way to a deep, embarrassed realization. He quickly pulled out the chair directly to his right. "Please," Julian said, his voice respectful and urgent. "Take my seat. I will have the staff bring another chair." Eleanor nodded approvingly and directed me to sit right between her and her son. The head table was the focal point of the entire venue, adorned with cascading white orchids and crystal candle holders. Sitting directly across from me was my mother. Brenda had been busy aggressively networking with Julian's elderly uncle, laughing too loudly and trying desperately to mimic wealth. When she turned her head and saw me taking the seat of honor next to the groom, her jaw unhinged. Brenda dropped her heavy silver fork. It clattered loudly against her china plate. She stared at me, then at Eleanor, her eyes wide with frantic confusion. "Maya," Brenda hissed across the floral centerpiece, her voice tight with panic. What are you doing? Get up immediately. You are embarrassing us. Get back to the kitchen where you belong. Eleanor stopped buttering her bread and stared at Brenda with cold fascination. Excuse me, Eleanor said smoothly. I specifically invited Maya to sit here. She is the most important guest in this room tonight. I certainly hope you are not speaking to a billion-dollar industry leader with such a tone. Brenda let out a harsh, mocking laugh, entirely missing the warning in Eleanor's voice. A billion-dollar leader, Brenda snorted, leaning forward over the table. Oh, Mrs. Sterling, please do not let her fool you. Do not praise her too much. She is just a dropout. She just mixes cheap lotions in her bathtub. The music in the room seemed to fade. The nearby guests stopped talking, tuning in to the drama unfolding at the head table. Brenda, desperate to regain control and belittle me in front of the wealthy in-laws, doubled down on her insults. She has always been obsessed with her dark skin and nappy hair, Brenda sneered, waving her hand dismissively at my face. When she was a teenager, I refused to buy her those expensive specialty hair products. She looked like a wild animal. So she started mixing household oils and kitchen grease in our bathtub, ruining my plumbing just to tame that mess on her head. She is not a leader. She is just a bitter girl playing chemist with cheap lotions because she could never look like Chloe. Chloe finally stumbled back into the dining room, arriving just in time to hear Brenda's vicious speech. Chloe rushed to the table, her eyes wide with terror, silently begging her mother to stop talking. But Brenda felt powerful. She felt validated by her own cruelty. Eleanor Sterling set her butter knife down on the pristine white tablecloth. She looked at Brenda, then looked at Julian, and finally let out a loud, uproarious laugh. It was not a polite giggle. It was a deep, booming laugh that echoed across the quiet restaurant. Cheap lotions. Brenda Eleanor gasped, wiping a tear of mirth from her eye. Are you completely out of your mind? Her brand melanin crown was valued at $1.2 billion last month. Brenda froze. The mocking smile slid right off her face. The aunties and uncles at the adjacent tables gasped loudly. Eleanor leaned across the table, her eyes locking onto Brenda with razor-sharp intensity. Those bathtub mixtures you just insulted happen to hold 43 international patents. Julian has been begging her for an exclusive distribution deal for 6 months just to save his venture capital portfolio. She is not playing chemist. She is the most powerful woman in the global beauty industry. The entire table went completely and utterly dead silent now. Chloe collapsed. The silence was so absolute, it felt like the crystal chandeliers might shatter from the sheer pressure. Chloe collapsed into the nearest chair, her legs giving out beneath the weight of her heavy gown. She gasped for air, her hands clutching her chest, as her fraudulent world disintegrated right in front of her billionaire groom. Julian did not even look down to help her. His eyes, like his mother Eleanor's, remained fixed on the incredible scene unfolding across the pristine white tablecloth. Brenda stood frozen. The malicious sneer she had worn just seconds ago was entirely wiped away. Her eyes darted from Eleanor to Julian, and finally they locked onto me. I could physically see the gears grinding inside her head. The realization was hitting her with the force of a freight train. The daughter she had relentlessly mocked for her dark skin. The child she had hidden away because her natural hair did not fit a Eurocentric standard of beauty. The girl she had thrown out onto the street with $495 was a self-made billionaire. Crucially, I was richer than the Sterling family she had been groveling to all evening. In the span of a single heartbeat, Brenda executed the most spectacular, sickening pivot I had ever witnessed. The venom vanished from her posture. She threw her shoulders back, plastered on a blinding theatrical smile, and forced a completely manufactured tear to pool in the corner of her eye. She stepped away from her side of the table and hurried around the extravagant floral centerpieces, making a direct line for my chair. "Maya, my brilliant, beautiful girl," Brenda cried out. Her voice was pitched loudly, intentionally, projecting so every wealthy guest, every Sterling family member, and every waiter in the vicinity could hear her performance. She threw her arms wide open, rushing forward to pull me into a suffocating embrace. "I always knew you had it in you. I always knew you were destined for absolute greatness." She reached me, leaning down to wrap her arms around me. She wanted the photo op. She wanted Eleanor Sterling to see a loving, supportive mother embracing her billionaire daughter. She wanted to instantly rewrite history and claim a piece of the Melanin Crown Empire for herself. "Look at her, Mrs. Sterling!" Brenda proclaimed loudly, her hands hovering just inches from my shoulders. "Is she not magnificent? People used to judge my parenting. They used to say I was too hard on her. But my strict parenting and tough love made her the titan she is today. I demanded perfection because I saw the raw potential hiding underneath. Every challenge I gave her was just preparation for the corporate world. I built this strong, independent woman. I did not let her touch me." As Brenda lunged forward to complete her performative hug, I coldly leaned back, shifting my weight so her arms grasped nothing but empty air. The rejection was physical, sharp, and undeniable. Brenda stumbled slightly, her heavy perfume washing over me like a cloud. She caught her balance, her fake smile trembling as she looked down at me. I dabbed the corner of my mouth with my napkin, setting it down with agonizing slowness. I looked directly into Brenda's eyes, ensuring my voice was low, steady, and loud enough for the entire VIP table to hear perfectly. "You mean the tough love where you stole my chemistry scholarship checks to buy Chloe designer bags, forcing me to sleep in a bus station?" I asked. The words hung in the air, sharp as a blade. Brenda's face drained of color. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I kept my gaze locked on hers, refusing to let her look away. "Yes, Brenda, it was incredibly inspiring. It is truly a masterclass in parenting to forge your daughter's signature, empty her college fund, and leave her homeless, just so your golden child could afford a Mercedes she did not earn. It really prepared me for the ruthlessness of the business world, knowing my first major financial theft would be executed by my own mother." The wealthy guests at the table gasped in genuine horror. Eleanor Sterling slammed her hand over her mouth, her aristocratic composure breaking entirely as she stared at Brenda with absolute disgust. Julian's father, a quiet man who had barely spoken all evening, dropped his fork onto his plate with a loud clatter. "You stole her scholarship money?" Julian demanded, his voice dropping into a dangerous, icy register. He glared at Brenda, then shifted his furious gaze down to Chloe, who was currently trying to make herself as small as possible in her chair. "You left your own flesh and blood to sleep in a bus station for designer bags." Brenda took a frantic step backward, raising her hands as if she could physically push the accusations away. No, you are misunderstanding the situation, Julian. Maya is exaggerating. It was a joint family account. It was a temporary loan for Chloe's pageant career. I was going to pay it back. I was teaching her financial independence. You left her homeless." Eleanor Sterling interrupted, her voice shaking with righteous fury. She stood up from her chair, drawing herself up to her full, imposing height. "I have encountered ruthless corporate raiders and hostile takeover specialists, Brenda. But I have never in my entire life met a woman vile enough to steal her own child's education to fund another child's vanity. It is utterly repulsive." Brenda was sweating now. The heavy makeup on her face began to separate, revealing the desperate aging woman underneath. She looked wildly around the room, realizing that her ultimate plan to infiltrate high society was crashing down around her. She had tried to leverage my success to save her sinking ship, but instead she had handed me the very match I needed to burn it all down. "Please, Mrs. Sterling," Brenda begged, her voice cracking. "We are leaving right now." Brenda grabbed Chloe by the upper arm, trying to physically haul her out of the five-star rooftop restaurant. But Chloe refused to move. Instead, she buried her face in her hands and unleashed a loud, theatrical wail. The fake tears started flowing instantly, running down her cheeks and ruining her flawless bridal makeup. She looked up at Julian with wide, glistening eyes, playing the ultimate helpless victim. "She is lying," Julian, Chloe sobbed, pointing a violently trembling finger directly at me. "Maya has always been absolutely obsessed with destroying my happiness. She hates her dark skin, and she hates that you chose me. She hired someone to fake those patent documents. She is a psychotic, jealous liar. Please, baby, you have to believe me." Julian did not move to comfort her. He stood perfectly still, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle twitched in his cheek. He looked from Chloe to his mother, who was staring at my sister like she was a diseased rat. The wealth guests at the surrounding tables sat in dead silence, watching this spectacular meltdown unfold. I stayed seated in my chair, crossing my legs, absolutely delighted by her desperate performance. You are embarrassing yourself, Chloe, I said smoothly, taking a slow sip of my sparkling water. Billionaires do not fall for cheap soap opera acting. Before Chloe could scream another wild accusation, a man in a crisp black tuxedo stepped through the maze of white linen tables. It was the general manager of the restaurant. He looked extremely uncomfortable but entirely resolute. He walked directly to the head table, bypassing the extravagant floral arrangements, holding a black leather check presenter in one hand and a wireless credit card terminal in the other. He stopped right next to Chloe. "Excuse me, miss," the manager said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "I apologize for the interruption, but there is an issue with the payment for this evening." Chloe's fake sobbing stopped immediately. Her face went rigid with fresh panic. "I told you to run this card on file." Chloe snapped, her tone instantly shifting from weeping victim to arrogant bride. "Just run it again. My bank is notoriously strict about large luxury purchases. They probably flagged it for fraud protection because we are spending so much money." She looked up at Julian, offering a highly nervous, high-pitched giggle. "You know how these premium accounts are, babe. They lock down at the slightest suspicious activity." The restaurant manager did not flinch at her arrogant tone. He held up the wireless terminal so the bright digital screen faced the entire VIP table. "I have run it 4 times," Miss the manager stated flatly. "And I have called the merchant services hotline. The bank did not flag this transaction for fraud protection. The bank has requested that we physically confiscate this card immediately." Julian stepped forward, his towering frame casting a dark shadow over Chloe. He reached out and took the credit card terminal directly from the manager's hands. He looked down at the glowing screen. Chloe let out a sharp gasp and tried to snatch it away, but Julian held it high out of her reach. His blue eyes turned as cold as glaciers. He looked down at Chloe, his voice dropping a full octave into a dangerous, terrifying calm. "You told me your account was frozen due to a bank security error," Julian said, his words clipping through the air like bullets. "You swore to me last week that your funds were just tied up in a tedious corporate trust transfer." Chloe shrank back into her chair, her jaw trembling violently. Julian turned the screen so Chloe and Brenda could see it clearly in the dim restaurant lighting. "This terminal does not say security error," Julian read aloud for the entire room to hear. "This terminal says severe delinquency. Account permanently closed due to extreme debt collections." The collective gasp from the Sterling family echoed loudly through the room. Eleanor Sterling stood up abruptly, clutching her expensive evening bag, looking thoroughly repulsed by the blatant financial fraud she was witnessing. Brenda realized they were seconds away from being escorted out by the police for theft of services. The rehearsal dinner bill was easily $20,000. Brenda spun around to face me, her previous arrogant hatred completely overridden by sheer, animalistic panic. She grabbed the edge of my table, leaning over the crystal glasses, her chest heaving. "Maya, please," Brenda begged, her voice cracking in pure pathetic desperation. "You have the money. Pay the bill. Just swipe your card and save the family face. Do not let them arrest us in front of the Sterlings. Think about our reputation." I looked at my mother, watching her sweat and beg for my hard-earned money. I slowly picked up a heavy, stiff white linen napkin from the table. I reached into my designer clutch and pulled out a solid gold fountain pen. "I'll pay the bill, Brenda," I said, my voice ringing out clearly over the hushed whispers of the wealthy guests. "But I do not do charity for people who steal from me. I operate on strict financial contracts." I slid the linen napkin and the solid gold pen across the pristine white tablecloth toward her trembling, sweaty hands. "I will cover the cost of this entirely extravagant dinner," I commanded, locking eyes with her. "But only if you sign a handwritten, legally binding promissory note right here, right now, acknowledging that you owe me every single cent. I want your full legal signature and your thumbprint firmly pressed onto this fabric before I even think about touching my wallet. You have exactly 10 short seconds to make your final decision before I let the restaurant manager call the local authorities to haul you both away in cold, heavy metal handcuffs." Brenda snatched the solid gold fountain pen from the white linen tablecloth. Her hand shook so violently that she nearly tore the expensive fabric as she scribbled her signature and pressed her thumbprint onto the makeshift contract. She handed the napkin back to me with pure, unadulterated hatred burning in her eyes. I signaled the restaurant manager, handed him my black card to clear the rehearsal dinner bill, and folded the napkin into my designer clutch. The night ended with Chloe in hysterics and the Sterling family leaving in disgusted silence. Less than 12 hours later, the sun rose on the morning of the wedding. The bridal suite at the Glass Conservatory venue was a sprawling, opulent room filled with the scent of white roses and expensive hairspray. Chloe was sequestered in an adjoining private room with a team of 4 makeup artists, working frantically to hide the swollen red puffiness around her eyes from crying all night. I stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, sipping a cup of black coffee and looking out at the meticulously manicured gardens. My phone buzzed continuously with emails from my legal team, but I ignored them for the moment. I was waiting for the inevitable. I knew my mother would not let the humiliation of last night go unanswered. Right on cue, the heavy wooden door to the main suite clicked shut, and the catering staff was abruptly dismissed. Brenda marched across the plush carpet, her expensive silk morning robe billowing behind her. In her place was the ruthless, calculating woman who had tormented me my entire childhood. "We need to have a serious conversation," Brenda said, her voice dropping into a harsh, demanding register. "You had your little moment of revenge last night. You embarrassed your sister in front of her future in-laws. You forced me to sign that ridiculous napkin. But today is the actual wedding day, and you are going to fix the massive mess you created." I took a slow sip of my coffee, turning away from the window to face her. "Fix the mess?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "I paid a $20,000 catering bill that you were going to be arrested for." Brenda waved her hand dismissively, as if $20,000 was spare change she had simply misplaced. "That is exactly what I'm talking about. You clearly have more money than you know what to do with. Julian and his parents are highly suspicious now. We need a massive show of good faith to prove that our family brings substantial capital to this union." "You are going to write a check," Brenda demanded, stepping directly into my personal space. "A cashier's check made out directly to Chloe for $500,000. It will completely erase any doubts they have about our financial standing, and it will smooth over that horrible scene you caused at the restaurant." I stared at her, letting the silence stretch until it became suffocating. She was standing there, demanding $500,000 from the daughter she had emotionally terrorized, all to fund a fraudulent illusion for her golden child. "It is the least you can do," Brenda snapped, her tone dripping with toxic entitlement. "I gave you life, Maya. I put a roof over your head. I fed you. I clothed you. You owe me for every single breath you take. You owe this family. You have hoarded all this wealth while your own sister is struggling. It is incredibly selfish. You will write that check right now, or so help me, I will have security throw you out of this venue before the music even starts." "I owe you," I said, my voice dangerously low and steady. "You want to talk about what I owe you, Brenda? Let us take a walk down memory lane. Let us talk about exactly what you gave me." "You will make time," I commanded, my voice slicing through her interruption like a knife. "Because if I remember correctly, the last time we were at a major milestone event for me, you were not demanding a check. You were laughing." Brenda tightened her jaw, but she did not look away. "It was my high school graduation." I continued, stepping closer to her. I had just walked across the stage as valedictorian. I was wearing a cheap dress. I came up to you holding my diploma, hoping for just one single ounce of maternal pride. Do you remember what you said to me in front of the entire extended family? "I will remind you," I said, my voice echoing off the suite walls. "You looked at my natural hair, this helped me style, and you laughed. You looked at my dark skin and told the aunties at least she is smart because beauty definitely skipped her. You called me an ugly duckling on the proudest day of my life. And when I finally stood up for myself, when I finally told you to stop tearing me down, what did you do?" "You were being disrespectful," Brenda hissed defensively. "You needed to learn your place. You kicked me out," I said, my voice cold as ice. "You marched back to the house, threw my few belongings onto the front lawn, and locked the door. You left your 18-year-old daughter on the street with exactly $495 to my name. You did not care if I was safe. You threw me away like garbage because I did not fit your twisted, colorist standard of what a daughter should look like." She looked me up and down with the exact same disdain she held 14 years ago. And I would do it again, Brenda stated fiercely, showing absolutely zero remorse. You were a stubborn, difficult child who refused to conform. Chloe was beautiful. Chloe was destined for greatness. She deserved the spotlight, and your constant complaining was dragging her down. Kicking you out clearly did you a favor anyway. It made you rich. So stop whining, open your designer bag, and write the check. Chloe needs that money to secure Julian, and you are going to provide it. I looked directly at the cold woman who gave birth to me. There was absolutely no love in her eyes, only raw greed and unyielding pride. She genuinely believed she was entitled to the empire I built from the ashes of her abuse. I reached deep into my very expensive designer bag, but I did not pull out a checkbook today, tomorrow, or ever. Instead of a checkbook, my fingers closed around the thick, heavy manila folder I had specifically prepared for this exact moment. I pulled it out and let it drop onto the pristine marble vanity with a loud, resounding thud. The sound shattered the tense silence in the bridal suite. Brenda blinked, her greedy expression faltering as she stared at the legal documents spilling out of the folder. What is this? Brenda demanded, her voice losing a fraction of its arrogant edge. I told you to write a check, Maya. Do not play games with me right now. Julian is going to be waiting at the altar in less than 3 hours. I am not playing games, Brenda, I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. I am just protecting my investments. You see, when you build a billion-dollar corporation, you learn how to spot a bad asset from a mile away. And this entire wedding is the worst asset I have ever seen. Brenda reached out and snatched the top document from the pile. Her eyes darted across the bold legal print at the top of the page. I watched the exact moment her brain processed the letterhead. The remaining color drained from her powdered face, leaving her looking hollow and terrified. Her hands began to shake so violently, the heavy parchment paper rattled in her grip. You recognize the name of that firm, do you not? I asked, leaning closer to her. It is the debt collection agency handling the second mortgage on your precious ancestral home. The house that has been in our family for 3 generations. The house you always bragged about owning outright. Brenda swallowed hard, taking a staggering step backward. How did you get these? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own rapid breathing. These are highly confidential financial records. They are my records now, I corrected her smoothly. Because I bought the debt collection agency last month. I own the paper you are holding, which means I own your debt. I stepped forward, forcing her to back up until her spine hit the wall of the luxurious bridal suite. I crossed my arms, staring her down with absolute authority. You really thought you could pull off a massive financial scam, and nobody would notice, I said, my voice sharp and unrelenting. You forged a remortgage on a fully paid-off house. You secretly borrowed $300,000 against the property just to fund Chloe's fake luxury lifestyle. You paid for her designer bags, her luxury car leases, and this ridiculously extravagant glass conservatory wedding using stolen equity. That is a lie, Brenda shrieked, though the sheer panic in her eyes confirmed every single word I said. I did not forge anything. I am the primary owner of that house. I have the right to leverage my own property to secure my daughter's future. You are a co-owner, Brenda. I corrected my tone, dropping to a lethal whisper. A fact you conveniently decided to ignore when you signed the bank documents. But we will get to your specific felonies in a minute. Right now, let us focus on your brilliant master plan. You drained $300,000 from the family estate because you were absolutely desperate to trap Julian. You needed to make Chloe look like she came from equal wealth so his high society white family would not ask too many questions. I'll bet the entire ancestral home on the assumption that Julian would blindly pay off all your debts the moment he said I do. You were banking on his venture capital money to save you from federal prison. Brenda pressed her hands against her temples, shaking her head frantically. You do not understand how high society works, Maya. Julian comes from old money. He expects a certain standard. If I had not funded Chloe's lifestyle, he never would have looked at her twice. I made a strategic family investment. I did what a mother has to do to elevate her children. You elevated her right into a massive fraud investigation. I shot back, completely disgusted by her delusion. Do you have any idea how catastrophic your financial situation actually is right now? You have missed 3 consecutive mortgage payments. You are legally in severe default. The grace period expired yesterday. I am the sole owner of your debt, Brenda. Do you understand what that means? It means I can seize the ancestral house at any moment. I can send the foreclosure notices right now and have the sheriff throw your belongings onto the curb before the sun goes down. Brenda let out a ragged, desperate gasp. Her knees buckled slightly, but she caught herself against the marble vanity. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and absolute hatred. You would not dare, she hissed, her chest heaving. That house belonged to your grandparents. You would not evict your own mother. You threw your 18-year-old daughter out onto the street with $495. I reminded her, my voice cold as ice. You laughed at my natural hair, called me ugly in front of the entire family, and left me to sleep in a bus station. Do not ever underestimate what I am capable of doing to protect my peace. I am simply treating you with the exact same business ruthlessness you taught me. I watched her breathing become shallow and erratic. She clutched the forged mortgage documents to her chest, as if shielding her heart from an impending attack. This is blackmail. Brenda gasped, her eyes darting around the bridal suite as if searching for a hidden exit. You are trying to extort your own family on the morning of a wedding. It is not extortion, I replied, picking up my black coffee and taking a relaxed, deliberate sip. It is an accountability check. You demanded a $500,000 check from me today. Brenda stared at my coffee cup as if I were drinking poison. Her chest heaved rapidly under her expensive silk robe. The sheer weight of the federal crimes she had committed hung heavy in the floral-scented air of the bridal suite. I watched her eyes dart wildly around the room, searching for an escape route, a loophole, a way to spin this massive financial fraud into a simple misunderstanding. But the cold, hard numbers printed on the documents I had thrown onto the vanity offered no comfort. She was backed into a corner of her own making, facing total ruin. Then something entirely disturbing happened. The suffocating panic gripping my mother suddenly snapped. Her frantic breathing slowed down, and her rigid posture loosened. A low, manic sound bubbled up from the back of her throat. It started as a dark chuckle and quickly escalated into a loud, malicious laugh that echoed violently off the marble walls. She reached out and snatched the thick stack of legal papers from the vanity. With a sudden burst of aggressive energy, she gripped the top pages and ripped them straight down the middle. The sound of heavy parchment tearing cut through the room. She shredded the foreclosure notices, the forged mortgage contracts, and the bank statements, ripping them again and again until her hands were full of meaningless confetti. She threw the torn pieces into the air, letting them rain down over the expensive white carpets and my designer shoes. You really thought a few pieces of paper would defeat me? Brenda sneered, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unhinged arrogance. You cannot scare me, Maya. You think you hold all the cards just because you bought a debt collection agency. You think you can waltz in here on the biggest day of our lives and destroy everything I have built for your sister. You are completely delusional. I set my coffee cup down on the marble counter, entirely unfazed by her childish display of destruction. Shredding those copies does not erase the digital files or the original deeds locked in my corporate vault, Brenda. The debt is real, and your signature on that fraudulent loan is very real. Brenda let out another sharp, condescending laugh, stepping closer to me with a triumphant glare. I do not care about your vault. I do not care about the default notices. In 3 hours, Chloe will be married to Julian. Do you understand what that means? It means we win. He is a billionaire venture capitalist. He will pay off everything we owe with a single snap of his fingers. $500,000 is absolutely nothing to a man like him. It is pocket change. He will clear the mortgage. He will clear the credit cards, and he will elevate this family far beyond your petty little threats. She pointed a manicured finger at my chest, her voice dripping with the same colorist venom she had weaponized against me since childhood. This is what this is really about, is it not? You are standing here trying to threaten me because you are burning alive with jealousy. You can build a cosmetic empire, you can wear expensive silk, and you can buy up all the bank debt in the world, but you will never have what Chloe has. I maintained my calm, predatory smile, letting her dig her own grave deeper with every single word. You will always just be the bitter, jealous, ugly sister. Brenda hissed, her eyes filled with supreme contempt. I spent years cultivating Chloe, protecting her light skin, making sure she had the finest clothes and the best opportunities. I knew her beauty would secure our future. I knew a powerful, wealthy white man like Julian would take one look at her and give her the world. And look at you, still trying to punish us, because I refused to waste my resources on a dark-skinned girl with unmanageable hair. You came here today thinking your money made you powerful, but you are still just the rejected outcast begging for my attention. Brenda took a step back, smoothing the front of her silk robe with aggressive, jerky movements. Enjoy your little tantrum, Maya. Go ahead and call your lawyers. By the time they file a single piece of paperwork, Chloe will have a diamond ring on her finger and the sterling fortune at her disposal. Julian loves her blindly. He will protect his wife and his new mother-in-law from whatever pathetic lawsuit you try to throw at us. We are untouchable. She spun around on her heel, completely dismissing my presence, and marched toward the heavy wooden door connecting to the private dressing room. I am going to get my beautiful daughter dressed for the wedding of the century, Brenda announced over her shoulder, her voice ringing with absolute delusional victory. And you are going to sit quietly in the audience and watch her get everything you ever wanted. The heavy door slammed shut behind her, the sharp sound echoing through the massive bridal suite. The sudden silence that filled the room was absolute perfection. I was left entirely alone, standing amidst the shredded pieces of the mortgage documents scattered across the plush white carpet. I did not feel a single ounce of anger. I did not feel hurt by her vicious, outdated insults. I felt a profound, exhilarating sense of peace. Brenda genuinely believed that Julian was a bottomless ATM, a naive savior who would blindly finance their fraudulent lifestyle without asking a single question. She believed her golden child had successfully trapped him. I slowly reached into my designer bag and pulled out my phone. The screen illuminated my face in the quiet room. I unlocked the device and navigated to my secure audio files. I scrolled past the corporate meeting recordings and financial memos until I found the specific file I had saved late last night. The file was simply labeled with Chloe's name. It was the crystal-clear high-definition recording from the restaurant restroom. The exact audio of Chloe screaming about her massive mountain of debt, admitting that Julian was her only ticket out, and explicitly stating her plan to use his venture capital money to wipe her slate clean. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, I heard the faint, elegant sound of a live string quartet beginning to play. The beautiful sweeping notes drifted across the manicured gardens and filtered into the bridal suite. The wedding march was starting to echo through the massive glass conservatory outside. The guests were taking their seats. The trap was perfectly set. I opened my messaging app and pulled up the private encrypted phone number Julian had given me during our deep business discussion at the rehearsal dinner. I attached the audio file to a new message. I did not add a caption. I did not include a warning. I simply looked out the window at the stunning wedding venue, smiled a sharp, victorious smile, and pressed send. I slipped my phone back into my designer bag and walked out of the ruined bridal suite. The shredded pieces of Brenda's financial doom were still scattered across the white carpet, a fitting monument to her delusions. I stepped out into the manicured gardens leading to the glass conservatory. The venue was absolutely breathtaking. Thousands of white orchids hung suspended from the vaulted glass ceilings, catching the late afternoon sunlight. A professional string quartet played a hauntingly beautiful classical piece in the corner. It was $1 million aesthetic paid for entirely by a fraudulent $300,000 mortgage that I now legally owned. An usher immediately escorted me to the front row. Eleanor Sterling had ensured my placement directly beside her, securing my status among the true high society guests. Across the wide white linen aisle sat my mother. Brenda was draped in an aggressively flashy sequin gown, her posture stiff with manufactured aristocratic pride. When she saw me calmly taking my seat next to the billionaire matriarch, she shot me a venomous, triumphant glare. She lifted her chin, her eyes flashing with arrogant victory. In her twisted mind, the fact that I was sitting quietly meant I had surrendered. She genuinely believed her shredded documents had neutralized my threat, and that Julian's endless wealth was only minutes away from saving her from federal prison. I did not glare back. I offered her a slow, knowing smile that made her blink in momentary confusion before the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the conservatory swung shut. The string quartet transitioned smoothly into the traditional wedding march. The entire congregation rose to their feet. The heavy doors slowly pushed open again, and Chloe stepped onto the white aisle runner. Visually, she was the absolute picture of a fairy tale princess. Her custom designer gown featured a cathedral-length train and thousands of hand-sewn pearls. But a closer look revealed the sheer suffocating terror vibrating through her entire body. Chloe was sweating profusely. A thin sheen of perspiration coated her forehead, ruining the expensive matte finish of her bridal makeup. Her chest heaved with shallow, erratic breaths. She gripped her cascading bouquet of white peonies so tightly, her hands were visibly shaking. She knew I had the power to destroy her, and every step she took toward the altar was laced with the agonizing fear that the truth would somehow slip out. But Chloe did not know the truth was already standing right in front of her. I shifted my gaze from the terrified bride to the groom waiting at the end of the aisle. Julian was standing on the elevated marble altar, but he did not look like a man about to marry the love of his life. He looked like an executioner. His face was stone cold, completely devoid of any joy or warmth. His sharp jaw was clenched so tightly, a muscle ticked violently near his temple. I was not looking at his beautiful bride walking down the aisle. He was staring directly down at his personal cell phone. He was gripping the device so fiercely that his knuckles were stark white against his tanned skin. He had opened my message. He had pressed play on the audio file. He had heard his supposedly loving fiancée and her mother explicitly plotting to use his venture capital money as a clueless human bailout to clear a mountain of hidden debt. The atmosphere inside the glass conservatory shifted instantly. The wealthy guests seated around me began to notice the groom's alarming demeanor. The polite, expectant smiles faded from the faces of the Sterling family executives. Eleanor Sterling shifted uncomfortably in the seat right next to me, her sharp eyes darting from her son to the bride and back again. She leaned forward slightly, sensing that something catastrophic was unfolding, though she did not yet know the details. The contrast between the romantic sweeping music of the string quartet and the suffocating heavy tension radiating from the altar was incredibly jarring. Chloe took another trembling step down the aisle. Her forced, trembling smile looked completely grotesque against the sheer panic in her eyes. She finally looked up from her bouquet and locked eyes with Julian. She expected to see adoration. She expected to see a wealthy savior ready to hand her the keys to an untouchable empire. Instead, she hit a solid wall of absolute freezing revulsion. Julian did not offer her a reassuring nod. He did not step forward to meet her halfway. He just stood there, towering over the floral arrangements, radiating a furious aura that practically sucked all the oxygen out of the beautiful glass room. Brenda, completely oblivious to the impending disaster, was busy leaning over the aisle, aggressively trying to make eye contact with the society photographers hired for the event. She was still performing, still trying to project the image of a wealthy, successful mother of the bride. She had spent my entire life telling me that my dark skin and natural hair made me worthless, while Chloe's light skin and straight hair made her inherently valuable. She had staked her entire existence, her home, and her freedom on the belief that a powerful white man would blindly accept their fraudulent facade simply because Chloe looked the part. I sat back comfortably in my premium front row seat. I crossed my legs, smoothing the fabric of my dress, and took a slow, deep breath of the floral-scented air. I had spent 14 years building my empire from the ground up, fighting through the corporate world with nothing but my own intellect and drive. Now I was finally going to watch the people who tried to bury me face the ultimate consequences of their own superficial greed. The beautiful string music swelled to its final crescendo as Chloe reached the bottom of the altar steps. The entire congregation held its collective breath, completely unnerved by the chilling silence coming from the groom. Chloe stepped onto the elevated marble platform, her heavy designer train dragging softly behind her. She extended her trembling lace-covered hands toward Julian. Under normal circumstances, this was the moment the groom would step forward, take his bride by the hands, and offer a reassuring, loving smile. Julian did absolutely none of that. He remained planted firmly in his spot, his posture rigid and unforgiving. He did not reach out to take her hands. He let Chloe stand there, her arms awkwardly suspended in the space between them, her forced smile trembling violently. The sheer humiliation of the rejected gesture sent a ripple of uncomfortable murmurs through the pews. Chloe hastily pulled her hands back, clasping them tightly around her bouquet of white peonies to hide her shaking. The officiating pastor, a distinguished older gentleman, unaware of the impending catastrophe, stepped up to the microphone. He smiled warmly at the congregation, attempting to smooth over the bizarre freezing tension radiating from the couple. He launched into a practiced, eloquent sermon about the virtues of honesty, the sanctity of trust, and the beautiful transparency required to build a lasting union. I sat back in my plush chair, crossing my legs elegantly, and fought the urge to burst into laughter. The irony was so thick it was practically suffocating the room. Honesty and transparency were the absolute last things Brenda and Chloe had brought to this venue. The pastor's voice echoed pleasantly across the glass conservatory, bouncing off the thousands of suspended white orchids. Finally, he reached the traditional, highly anticipated portion of the ceremony. He looked out over the crowd of wealthy executive socialites and my deeply fraudulent family members. If anyone here knows any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, the pastor proclaimed, his voice carrying a dramatic weight, speak now or forever hold your peace. A heavy, expectant silence fell over the room. Across the wide aisle, Brenda physically tensed. Her shoulders hiked up to her ears and her hands gripped the edges of her seat. She snapped her head toward me, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated panic. She was absolutely terrified. Brenda fully expected me to stand up, march down the aisle, and slam the foreclosure documents right onto the altar. She thought this was my moment to announce her staggering debts and expose the forged mortgage to Julian's entire high society network. I did not move a single muscle. I reached over to the small ledge next to my seat, picked up my crystal flute of vintage champagne, and brought it to my lips. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The cool, crisp liquid slid down my throat. I lowered the glass, placed it carefully back onto the ledge, and offered my mother a serene, utterly unbothered smile. Brenda let out a massive, audible exhale. Her tense posture instantly dissolved. She slumped back into her chair, a smug, deeply triumphant smirk spreading across her heavily powdered face. She looked at me with absolute contempt, her eyes gleaming with victory. In her delusional mind, she had won. She firmly believed that I had chickened out. She assumed my threats in the bridal suite were nothing but a jealous bluff, and that I was too intimidated by the wealthy white crowd to actually ruin her golden child's big day. Brenda smoothed her sequined dress, completely satisfied that her massive financial scam was completely safe. But the silence in this glass conservatory did not end. Maya saying nothing was one thing, but Julian was still refusing to speak. The traditional pause for objections stretched on for 5 seconds, then 10 seconds, then 15 agonizing seconds. The wealthy guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Eleanor Sterling, sitting right beside me, narrowed her sharp eyes at her son, recognizing the lethal anger radiating from him. Julian was staring holes directly into Chloe's face. His blue eyes were practically burning through her fake innocence. He looked at her with such profound, visceral disgust that Chloe began to visibly sweat again. A bead of perspiration rolled down the side of her neck, staining the collar of her expensive gown. The pastor cleared his throat loudly, trying to break the agonizing tension. Moving forward, the pastor said, his voice a bit more strained now. The couple has chosen to write their own vows. Chloe, you may begin. Chloe visibly swallowed hard. She handed her bouquet to her bridesmaid and reached into her bodice with trembling fingers, pulling out a small lace-trimmed piece of parchment paper. She took a deep, shuddering breath. When she looked up, the terrified, sweating scam artist was instantly gone. She effortlessly snapped back into her role as the perfect, innocent golden child. Her eyes filled with manufactured, glistening tears that hovered perfectly on her lower lash line without ruining her makeup. Julian, my love. Chloe began, her voice quivering with practiced emotion. When I first met you, I was intimidated by your world. People see your success, your incredible venture capital firm, and your immense wealth. But I never cared about any of that. I took another sip of my champagne, marveling at the sheer audacity of her lies. From the moment you smiled at me, Chloe continued laying the performance on incredibly thick. I knew that your heart was the only wealth I would ever need. You are my safe harbor. You have taught me the true meaning of partnership. I stand before you today, bringing nothing but my complete honesty and my unconditional love. I promise to build a foundation of absolute transparency with you. I promise to never keep secrets, to protect your heart, and to value our bond above any material possession this world has to offer. You are my billionaire in spirit, and that is all that matters to me. A soft collective sigh rippled through the audience. Several of the wealthy Sterling relatives murmured in appreciation, completely enchanted by the beautiful light-skinned bride declaring her pure, unselfish intentions. Across the aisle, Brenda pulled a lace handkerchief from her clutch and dabbed at her dry eyes, performing the role of the deeply moved mother. The guests offered a gentle, unified sound of adoration, but Julian did not sigh. He did not soften. He stood there gripping his phone inside his suit jacket pocket, knowing with absolute certainty that every single word she just spoke was a calculated, manipulative lie designed to steal his fortune. The echoing silence inside the glass conservatory pressed down on the crowd like a physical weight. Chloe delivered a masterpiece of manipulation, her eyes shining with perfectly manufactured tears, as she pledged eternal devotion to a human bank account. The wealthy guests were completely captivated, wiping away sympathetic tears. Across the wide aisle, Brenda nodded in proud approval, convinced the trap had finally snapped shut. Her golden child played the selfless, loving bride to absolute perfection. The officiating pastor offered a warm, approving smile. He turned his attention to the groom reaching into the breast pocket of his ceremonial robe. He pulled out a thick piece of premium cardstock, elegantly folded and inscribed with gold lettering. It contained the vows Julian had submitted during the wedding rehearsal the previous evening. The pastor extended his hand, offering the parchment to Julian so he could begin his response. Julian did not lift his arm. He did not reach for the expensive cardstock. He simply stared down at the crisp white paper as if it were contaminated. The pastor held the card, suspended his warm smile, faltering into polite confusion. He cleared his throat softly, giving the paper a shake. Julian remained perfectly still. His broad shoulders locked into a rigid defensive posture. The muscle near his jaw ticked furiously. He finally dragged his piercing blue eyes away from the pastor, locking them entirely onto Chloe. The innocent facade Chloe constructed over the last 24 hours instantly cracked. Her lips parted, drawing a sharp, erratic breath. Her manicured hands tightened around her cascading bouquet of white peonies, crushing delicate petals against the heavy silk of her gown. She leaned forward a fraction of an inch, her voice dropping into a frantic whisper only the people standing on the marble altar could hear. Julian Chloe hissed, her eyes darting nervously toward the front row, where his powerful mother sat watching every movement. Julian, please take the paper. People are staring. You are ruining the ceremony. Julian let out a dark sound completely devoid of humor. He finally moved. He raised his right hand, completely bypassing the pastor and the written vows. He reached directly inside his tailored suit jacket, retrieving his personal cell phone. The device looked jarringly out of place against the romantic backdrop of the wedding altar. A low murmur rippled through the congregation. The Sterling family executives shifted uncomfortably. Brenda gripped the edges of her chair, her heavily powdered face twisting in panic. She had absolutely no idea what was happening, but her predatory instincts told her the illusion was rapidly falling apart. I sat back comfortably next to Eleanor Sterling, keeping my posture completely relaxed. I took another slow sip of my vintage champagne, relishing the magnificent spectacle unfolding feet away from me. Julian did not look at his confused family. He did not look at the pastor. He stepped entirely away from his bride, closing the physical distance between himself and the microphone stand positioned at the center of the altar. He tapped the screen with precise, aggressive movements. He swiped down, accessing the device settings. The audio technician stationed at the back of the conservatory jolted in his seat. A sharp electronic chime suddenly echoed through the massive venue. It rang out clearly from the high-fidelity surround sound speakers hidden among the thousands of suspended white orchids. Julian manually connected his personal phone directly to the premium Bluetooth audio system. The modern technological sound completely shattered the traditional romantic atmosphere of the ceremony. Julian stepped directly up to the microphone. He gripped the metal stand with his left hand, leaning forward slightly. When he spoke, his voice did not hold a single trace of love, warmth, or affection. It was a freezing, lethal tone that commanded terrified attention from every single person in the room. "Before I take my vows," Julian announced, his deep voice booming effortlessly through the venue speakers. "I think my family and friends need to hear the bride's truest vows." Chloe let out a strangled gasp. She lunged forward, her heavy cathedral train violently tangling around her legs, but she was too late. Julian pressed his thumb aggressively against the brightly illuminated screen of his personal phone. He hit play. The audio file I had sent him minutes ago began to broadcast over the massive speaker system. The sound quality was incredibly crisp and undeniably clear. The entire congregation sat paralyzed as the frantic, vicious voice of the bride filled the glass conservatory. "Stay away from my billionaire," Chloe's recorded voice shrieked through the speakers, the nasty echo perfectly captured. "I do not care what kind of insane delusion you have cooked up in your head. You are going to back off right now." The wealthy guests gasped in collective horror. Eleanor Sterling went completely rigid beside me, her eyes widening in absolute disgust. Brenda tried to stand up, her mouth opening in a silent scream of sheer terror, but her legs refused to support her weight. The recording continued to play, blasting Chloe's aggressive, toxic rant across the beautiful venue. The congregation listened in stunned silence as the bride screamed about her dark-skinned, ugly sister, trying to ride her coattails. They heard the raw, unfiltered colorism and the extreme jealousy fueling her entire existence. But the most devastating moment was still coming. Julian stood by the microphone, forcing Chloe to listen to her own massive financial fraud. "You think paying one single bill makes you a savior?" Chloe's recorded voice snapped fiercely. "I owe people, Maya. Dangerous, unforgiving people. I am sitting on a mountain of debt so high it is literally choking me. Julian is my only ticket out of this nightmare. Once I have that diamond ring on my finger," the recording blasted relentlessly, "his venture capital money will wipe my slate completely clean. Just trick him into marrying me, Mom. His venture capital money will pay off all our debts. The idiot does not know a thing." The final echoing syllable of Chloe's recorded voice hung in the air of the glass conservatory, like a detonated bomb. "The idiot does not know a thing." Those 8 words bounced off the thousands of suspended white orchids and shattered the pristine illusion of the entire afternoon. For one agonizing suspended second, the room was trapped in a vacuum of absolute silence. Then utter chaos erupted. The congregation of wealthy venture capitalists, socialites, and corporate executives exploded into a symphony of horrified gasps. Men in tailored suits shifted uncomfortably, pulling their spouses closer. Women in expensive silk dresses covered their mouths, their eyes darting wildly between the altar and the front row. The professional string quartet in the corner completely abandoned their instruments, a cello bow clattering loudly onto the polished marble floor. The carefully curated, million-dollar fairy tale was instantly reduced to a trashy, humiliating spectacle. Sitting directly beside me, Eleanor Sterling shot to her feet with the force of a hurricane. The Sterling family matriarch was absolutely livid. Her face, usually a mask of calm, aristocratic control, was flushed dark red with pure, unadulterated fury. She gripped the back of the white wooden chair in front of her so tightly her knuckles turned white. She was staring at Chloe with a level of disgust normally reserved for vermin. Eleanor had spent her entire life protecting her family's empire from corporate raiders and hostile takeovers. To realize a desperate, debt-ridden scam artist had nearly infiltrated her bloodline under the guise of true love was the ultimate insult. On the elevated marble altar, the complete gravity of the situation finally crashed down on Chloe. Her legs simply gave out. The flawless, confident bride collapsed right there on the pristine white runner, her heavy cathedral train bunching awkwardly around her waist. She dropped heavily to her knees, abandoning all remaining scraps of her dignity. She lunged forward, throwing her arms around Julian's tailored legs. Her manicured hands desperately grabbed fistfuls of his expensive suit trousers, clinging to him as if he were a life raft in a churning ocean. "Julian, baby, please listen to me." Chloe wailed, her voice tearing through the ambient noise of the shocked crowd. The fake glistening tears she had produced for her vows were instantly replaced by a flood of genuine, terrified sobbing. Black mascara ran down her light skin in jagged, ugly streaks. "It is a fake. It is a complete fabrication." Julian did not look down at her. He stood like a statue carved from ice, completely repulsed by the woman groveling at his feet. He made no move to comfort her, no move to help her stand. He just stared straight ahead, his jaw locked tight as he processed the monumental bullet he had just dodged. When Julian refused to even acknowledge her presence, Chloe twisted her body around on the marble floor. She locked her frantic, tear-stained eyes onto me, sitting calmly in the front row. Her desperation morphed instantly into vicious, cornered rage. She pointed a shaking finger directly at my face, screaming at the top of her lungs so every single wealthy guest could hear her frantic defense. "She made it up!" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking under the intense strain of her own lies. "It is a deepfake. Maya manipulated that audio with artificial intelligence because she wants to destroy me. She has been insanely jealous of me since we were children. She hates her own dark skin and her nappy hair, and she is furiously jealous of my light skin and my perfect life. She is trying to ruin my wedding because no high society man will ever look at her the way you look at me, Julian." The sheer audacity of her colorist attack sent a fresh wave of appalled whispers rolling through the conservatory. She was kneeling in her own ruined wedding dress, caught dead to rights, attempting massive financial fraud. Yet she was still desperately trying to weaponize my skin tone to save herself. She genuinely believed her lighter complexion was a shield that would somehow magically deflect the reality of her criminal behavior. I did not break my posture. I did not raise my voice to defend myself against her pathetic, racist accusations. I simply set my crystal champagne flute down on the small table next to me and looked at her with an expression of profound, chilling boredom. The truth did not need a defense attorney. The recording had been crystal clear, capturing the exact, unmistakable cadence of her greedy, frantic plotting in the restroom. No artificial intelligence in the world could perfectly replicate the specific, desperate whine of Chloe begging her mother to secure a billionaire bailout. Across the wide aisle, Brenda was undergoing a catastrophic meltdown of her own. Her master plan was disintegrating before her very eyes. The $300,000 forged mortgage she had taken out on our ancestral home was now a ticking time bomb. The venture capital money she had banked on to save her from federal prison was permanently gone. The wealthy, powerful in-laws she had spent months desperately trying to impress were currently staring at her like she was a highly infectious disease. Brenda's entire existence was built on control and superiority. She had spent my whole life meticulously managing her image, ensuring everyone saw her as the perfect mother with the perfect light-skinned golden child. Now she was publicly exposed as a manipulative, debt-ridden fraudster who plotted to extort a prominent billionaire. Her mind simply could not process the magnitude of her defeat. The cognitive dissonance snapped her last remaining thread of sanity. Brenda let out a guttural, feral scream. It was not a word but a raw, animalistic sound of pure, unhinged fury. She scrambled out of her front row seat, kicking her expensive chair backward so violently it crashed into the row behind her. She did not look at the pastor. She did not look at Julian. She locked her furious eyes entirely on me. In her twisted reality, this was not the consequence of her own massive financial crimes. This was my fault for refusing to stay in the shadows and silently fund her fraudulent lifestyle. I was the scapegoat, and she needed to punish me for refusing to play my assigned role. Brenda charged. She sprinted directly across the wide aisle, her flashy sequined gown sparkling aggressively under the glass ceiling. She stormed straight toward my seat in the front row, her face contorted into a terrifying mask of absolute hatred. She raised her right hand high into the air, her manicured fingers curled ready to strike my face with all the violent force she could muster. "You poisonous snake!" Brenda screamed, her voice tearing through the conservatory with lethal, unhinged malice. You ruined your sister's life. Brenda closed the distance between the aisle and the front row with terrifying speed. Her sequined gown flashed violently under the glass conservatory ceiling. Her arm raised high, manicured fingers curled into a claw aiming directly for my face. I did not flinch. I did not even raise my hands to protect myself. I simply sat there fully prepared to watch her catch an assault charge in front of 50 wealthy witnesses. But the blow never landed. A blur of tailored black wool stepped directly into her path. Julian had moved with lightning speed, abandoning the marble altar and bodily shielding me from my own mother. He reached out and caught Brenda's descending wrist right in midair. His large hand clamped around her forearm with an iron grip, stopping her assault dead in its tracks. The loud smack of his hand catching her wrist echoed sharply over the stunned murmurs of the wedding guests. Brenda let out a shocked gasp, her eyes widening as she realized who had intercepted her. Julian glared down at her, his blue eyes burning with an intensity that made the older woman physically shrink back. He did not gently release her. He shoved her arm away with absolute visceral disgust, stepping squarely between us, like an impenetrable wall. Do not ever raise your hand to her again, Julian warned, his voice low and vibrating with a lethal kind of anger. You are a complete disgrace. You stand in a house of worship and try to strike a woman who has shown you more grace than you deserve. Brenda stumbled backward, clutching her wrist, her chest heaving as she looked wildly around the room. She expected anyone to jump to her defense. But the high society guests simply stared at her with open contempt. Eleanor Sterling, sitting right beside me, looked as if she might summon her personal security team to drag Brenda out by her hair. Julian turned his back on my mother, dismissing her entirely, and directed his freezing gaze down to where Chloe was still kneeling on the white aisle runner. My sister was a mess of ruined makeup and heavy silk, shaking like a cornered animal. Her desperation was suffocating the room, but Julian was completely immune to her fake tears. You thought I was an idiot, Julian stated, his voice echoing clearly through the speaker system he was still connected to. You thought you could parade around in designer gowns you could not afford, play the sweet innocent bride, and use my bank accounts to magically erase your catastrophic financial failures. You thought you could sit in a restaurant restroom and laugh about tricking a rich white man into bailing out your fraudulent lifestyle, while simultaneously degrading your own sister based on the beautiful color of her skin. Chloe let out a pathetic sob, reaching a trembling hand toward him. Julian, please, I love you. It is not about the money. I never cared about your firm. Oh, I know you do not care about my firm, Julian shot back, his tone laced with heavy irony. Because if you actually cared about my business, if you had bothered to ask me a single genuine question about my daily life, instead of just asking for my credit card limit, you would have known the absolute truth. You would have known that my venture capital firm is not a bottomless automatic teller machine. We are not sitting on a mountain of liquid cash waiting to be spent on luxury cars and ancestral home mortgages. Chloe blinked, her fake crying stalling for a fraction of a second as her greedy brain tried to process his unexpected words. The guests leaned in closer, utterly captivated by the spectacular implosion of this notorious gold digger. My firm is currently managing a highly volatile transition period. Julian continued, ensuring every single guest heard the reality of his situation. Our most critical make-or-break project is heavily reliant on securing external capital. We have been fighting for our professional lives for the past 6 months. We needed a $50 million investment just to keep our doors open and save the jobs of 200 loyal employees. If we did not secure that specific thing, by the end of this fiscal quarter, my entire legacy would have gone totally bankrupt. I am not your financial savior, Chloe. I am a businessman who was desperately looking for a massive lifeline. Brenda let out a sharp, horrified gasp. The realization that the billionaire she had bet her house on was actually seeking a bailout of his own hit her like a physical blow to the chest. Her entire master plan evaporated into thin air. She had forged a $300,000 mortgage for absolutely nothing. She had completely sold her soul for a man who needed saving just as badly as she did. And do you want to know the absolute best part? Julian asked, a dark, humorless smile finally touching the corners of his mouth. Do you want to know who bravely stepped up to the plate? Do you want to know the identity of the ruthless, brilliant, incredibly powerful investor who analyzed my entire portfolio and agreed to wire $50 million to save my firm from total collapse? Chloe shook her head, her eyes wide with suffocating terror. She did not want to hear the answer. She already knew exactly what he was going to say, and the truth was going to destroy her completely. Julian turned slightly, gesturing directly to me where I sat comfortably in the front row. He looked at Chloe with absolute unfiltered revulsion. The sole investor who agreed to save my firm is sitting right there. Maya is my majority stakeholder. Maya is the one writing the checks that will keep my employees fed. She holds my corporate future in her brilliant hands. So before you ever fix your vicious mouth to call her ugly again, remember your place. The sheer force of Julian's revelation hit the glass conservatory like a physical shockwave. Chloe remained collapsed on the white aisle runner, her custom designer gown pooling around her in a pathetic heap of heavy silk and ruined pearls. Her mouth opened and closed repeatedly, gasping for air as her brain short-circuited. She looked up at the man she had spent the last 2 years manipulating, finally realizing that the brilliant venture capitalist had completely outplayed her. Julian towered over the sobbing bride. "You spun the most sickening web of lies I have ever heard," Julian said, his voice dropping into a lethal register echoing through the venue speakers. "You sat in my penthouse weeping fake tears, telling me your sister was a hopeless drug addict. You told me she stole thousands of dollars from your hardworking mother, draining your accounts to feed her habits, and that you were forced to kick her out to protect yourselves." A loud collective gasp rippled through the wooden pews. The wealthy corporate executives and socialites stared at Chloe with absolute unfiltered revulsion. He gestured aggressively toward me. "How exactly do you explain that the drug-addicted thief you fabricated is actually the visionary billionaire saving my entire career? How do you explain that the sister you threw away is the sole financial backer, keeping my employees from losing their livelihoods? How do you explain that the woman you called ugly is literally paying for the very glass conservatory you are kneeling in right now?" Chloe violently shook her head, burying her face in her trembling hands. "It is not true," Chloe shrieked, her voice muffled and frantic. "She is tricking you. She is setting us up." "Stop lying," Julian roared over the audio system. "You do not have a single dime. Your bank accounts are in severe delinquency. You used my credit card for your rehearsal dinner, because yours was confiscated. You plotted to use my firm as your personal bailout fund, completely unaware that my firm only exists today because your sister decided I was a worthwhile investment." Eleanor Sterling stood up from her front row seat, smoothing her impeccable silver gown with sharp movements. She looked at Brenda, breathing heavily on the marble altar. "You are the most repulsive scavengers I have ever had the misfortune of encountering," Eleanor announced, her aristocratic voice slicing through the heavy air. "You tried to trap my son to cover your financial crimes while simultaneously degrading a woman who possesses more brilliance in her little finger than your entire bloodline." Eleanor turned to the Sterling family guests. "We are leaving," she commanded with absolute authority. "Do not leave a single gift. We are entirely done here." Dozens of wealthy investors, old money socialites, and powerful executives turned their backs on the weeping bride and began marching toward the exit doors. The sight of the fleeing billionaires finally snapped Brenda's fragile thread of sanity. The venture capital money was walking out the door. Her fraudulent master plan was completely dead. The forged mortgage was suddenly a very inescapable mountain of crushing debt. Backed into a corner with absolutely no way out, Brenda completely lost her mind. She went entirely feral. "You cannot just walk away from us," Brenda screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Julian's back. "We signed contracts for the venue. You promised to marry my daughter. You made a commitment to this family." Julian did not even turn around. He unclipped the small microphone from his lapel, dropped it onto the white runner with a loud thud, and stepped off the altar. Brenda stomped her expensive designer heel violently against the polished marble platform. "I do not care about your failing firm," Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking as it echoed loudly off the high glass ceiling. "Do you hear me, Julian? We do not need your bankrupt little business. You are nothing but a broke loser pretending to be a billionaire. I will sue you for everything you have left," Brenda threatened, waving her arms frantically to project an illusion of power to the remaining guests. I will drag you through civil court for breach of promise. I will publicly humiliate you. You think you can embarrass us and walk away. I come from a deeply respected family. I own my massive ancestral estate entirely outright. I have hard assets. I have real estate. I have generational wealth that will utterly ruin you in a court of law. Chloe let out a loud wail, burying her head against the marble steps. She knew exactly what her mother had done to that generational wealth, but she was too paralyzed by fear to stop Brenda's delusional ranting. I have a massive, fully paid-off mansion, Brenda yelled, spit flying from her painted lips. We do not need your pathetic charity. We are completely untouchable. I sat quietly in my front row seat, watching the woman who gave birth to me desperately cling to a fictional reality. She was publicly boasting about the very asset she had secretly leveraged into a catastrophic felony, completely unaware that I was holding the deed to the cemetery. The show had reached its absolute peak. It was time to bring down the curtain. I reached down and picked up my designer handbag from the floor. I pulled out the heavy manila folder containing the original mortgage documents, the default notices, and the undeniable proof of her massive bank fraud. I calmly stood up from my premium seat. I smoothed the fine fabric of my emerald green silk dress, completely unbothered by the incredibly chaotic screaming spectacle unfolding around me. I took a slow, deliberate breath, enjoying the sweet scent of the thousands of beautiful white orchids hanging above. Then I stepped forward, my high heels clicking sharply against the white aisle runner, and began my ascent up the marble altar. My heels clicked against the pristine marble like a ticking clock. I ascended the altar steps with deliberate precision. Brenda was panting heavily from her screaming tirade, her sequined gown sparkling aggressively. She glared at me, fully expecting me to engage in a screaming match to distract from her public humiliation. I was not going to give her that satisfaction. I stopped mere inches from where Chloe remained crumpled on the floor, weeping uncontrollably into her ruined designer wedding dress. I kept my cold gaze locked entirely on my mother. I raised my right hand and gave a sharp, silent signal toward the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the glass conservatory. The heavy doors swung open with a loud thud. The remaining wealthy guests twisted around in their wooden pews. Marching down the wide white aisle was not security, nor was it the police. It was my elite, high-powered corporate legal team. 3 men and 2 women dressed in custom-tailored charcoal suits moved in perfect, intimidating unison. They carried heavy leather briefcases, their expressions completely devoid of emotion. They looked like professional executioners arriving to carry out a corporate death sentence. Brenda took a hesitant step backward, the arrogant fire in her eyes suddenly flickering with profound uncertainty. She looked from me to the approaching lawyers, her manicured hands fluttering nervously near her throat. "What is this?" Brenda demanded, her voice dropping into a harsh, fearful whisper. "Who are these people, Maya? You cannot bring thugs into a sacred venue. I will have them arrested for trespassing." "They are not thugs, Brenda," I replied, my voice smooth and carrying effortlessly across the silent room. "They are senior partners at one of the most ruthless financial law firms in Manhattan, and they are here to personally deliver your absolute reality check." The lead attorney, an imposing man with silver hair, stepped onto the marble altar. He simply unclasped his heavy leather briefcase, the sharp metallic snap echoing loudly in the tense silence. He retrieved a thick stack of original watermarked legal documents bound in a red folder. He handed the stack directly to me with a respectful nod and stepped back, folding his hands behind his back in complete silence. I weighed the heavy documents in my hands. This was the culmination of 14 years of hard work, relentless determination, and an unwavering commitment to my own self-worth. I raised the thick stack of papers high into the air and brought them down hard onto the marble altar right in front of Brenda and Chloe. The resulting slap sounded like a gunshot. "You just stood here and screamed at Julian about your massive, fully paid-off ancestral mansion," I stated, my voice ringing with absolute authority. "You bragged about your generational wealth. You threatened to ruin him in civil court using the power of your real estate assets. But we both know that mansion is not fully paid off anymore, is it?" Brenda physically recoiled, her face turning an ugly ashen gray. She stared at the red folder resting on the marble altar as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. "You are bluffing," Brenda hissed, though her entire body was visibly trembling. "You do not have anything. That house is mine. I have the deed locked away in my safe." I reached out and flipped open the heavy red folder, exposing the pristine notarized mortgage documents inside. "I have the original mortgage contract right here, Brenda," I said, tapping my manicured fingernail against the bold black ink on the signature line. "The exact contract you signed 6 months ago when you secretly borrowed $300,000 to pay for this ridiculous glass conservatory wedding. You leveraged the entire estate because you were completely desperate to fund Chloe's fake luxury lifestyle." Chloe let out a strangled, pathetic wail from the floor, burying her face deeper into her hands. She knew the truth, and the sheer terror of facing the consequences was physically shutting down her nervous system. "I have the right to leverage my own property!" Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking wildly as she tried to defend her indefensible actions. "I am the primary homeowner. I can take out whatever loans I want to secure my daughter's future. You cannot stop me from managing my own assets. You bought a debt collection agency, so what? It is still a highly legal loan and I will handle it my way." I leaned forward, resting my hands firmly on the cold marble altar, closing the distance between us until I was looking Brenda dead in the eye. "It is not a legal loan, Mom," I whispered, my voice dripping with lethal, calculated precision. "And you are not the sole owner of that property." Brenda froze. Her eyes widened to the size of saucers. Her mouth fell open, a silent gasp dying in her throat as the horrific realization began to set in. "You forged my signature on that $300,000 mortgage, Mom," I announced, raising my voice so the words echoed clearly into the high glass ceiling. "You were so desperate to fund Chloe's vanity that you completely forgot one tiny, crucial legal detail. When Dad died, he did not leave that house entirely to you. He left 50% of the ancestral house in my name. I am the legal co-owner of that property, and I have never signed a single piece of paper authorizing a loan of any kind." The entire crowd went utterly, completely dead silent. The few remaining guests stopped breathing. The string quartet players stared in open-mouthed horror. Even Julian, who had been furious just moments ago, looked at my mother with a new level of profound, disgusted shock. The sheer crushing weight of the felony instantly settled over the entire glass conservatory. Brenda realized she had not just made a bad financial investment. She finally realized she had just committed massive, undeniable, catastrophic bank fraud. I did not give my mother a single second to catch her breath or formulate another pathetic lie. I took a step closer to the altar, looking down at the woman who had made my childhood a living nightmare. "As of 9 o'clock this morning, I officially reported your forged documents to the federal authorities," I announced, my voice cutting through the silent glass conservatory like a freshly sharpened blade. "I am executing my legal right to foreclose on the property immediately. That ancestral home you bragged so proudly about to the Sterling family is currently being seized. You are completely locked out. You and Chloe are not just entirely homeless, Brenda. You are currently sitting on $500,000 in toxic debt with absolutely zero assets to your name. But the financial ruin is honestly the least of your problems right now." The lead attorney from my corporate legal team stepped forward, fixing his suit jacket. He looked at my mother with the clinical detachment of a predator analyzing its prey. "Forgery on a mortgage document crosses state and federal lines," the lawyer stated, his voice booming across the ruined venue. "That elevates your actions to federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. The authorities have already frozen your remaining bank accounts pending a full criminal investigation. You are facing mandatory minimum sentences in a federal penitentiary." Brenda let out a ragged, horrifying gasp. Her knees finally buckled under the immense, crushing pressure of her own actions. She collapsed onto the polished marble altar, her aggressive sequined gown pooling around her like a deflated parachute. She clutched her chest frantically, gasping for oxygen as the terrifying reality of federal prison materialized before her eyes. Chloe, who had been weeping hysterically on the floor, suddenly scrambled forward. She dragged her heavy, ruined custom designer wedding dress across the white aisle runner, literally crawling on her hands and knees toward where I stood. Her light skin was stained with black streaks of expensive waterproof mascara. The confident, arrogant, golden child who had mocked my natural hair just 24 hours ago was completely gone. In her place was a broken, terrified criminal begging for her freedom. "Please, Maya," Chloe wailed, her voice cracking as she desperately reached out and grabbed the hem of my emerald green silk dress. "I am your sister. We share the same blood. You cannot do this to us. You have billions of dollars in your bank accounts. This money means absolutely nothing to you. Just pay off the debt and tell the lawyers to drop the charges. Please forgive us. Do not let them send me to a jail cell. I will do whatever you want." I looked down at the pathetic weeping woman clutching my dress. I did not feel a single ounce of. I reached down and firmly grabbed Chloe by the chin. I forced her to lift her head and look directly into my eyes. The terrified reflection staring back at me was a sweet, undeniable vindication for every tear I shed when they threw me out onto the street. I kept my grip on her chin firm and unwavering. "Well," I said, my voice echoing clearly over her pathetic sobbing, "at least I am smart. Beauty definitely skipped your soul." Chloe let out a devastated, broken sob, collapsing back onto the cold marble floor. The poetic justice of having her mother's vile 14-year-old insult flipped and permanently branded onto her own spirit completely shattered her. Julian had seen and heard absolutely everything he needed to know. He looked at Chloe and Brenda with final, absolute revulsion. He turned his back on the weeping bride without a single word of farewell. Julian walked briskly down the aisle, joining his mother, Eleanor, and the rest of the powerful Sterling family. They marched out of the glass conservatory in a unified front of disgust, completely cutting their ties to the toxic mess my mother had created. The remaining wealthy guests immediately scrambled out of their wooden pews, rushing toward the exit doors as fast as their expensive shoes could carry them. Nobody wanted to be associated with a family facing federal fraud charges. Within 60 seconds, the extravagant $1 million wedding venue was completely empty, save for the caterers, quickly dismantling the reception tables and my legal team packing up their briefcases. I turned around and walked slowly down the white aisle runner. Behind me, the agonizing sounds of Brenda and Chloe, sobbing hysterically in the ruins of their fake, fraudulent fairy tale, echoed against the thousands of suspended white orchids. I did not look back. I stepped out of the glass conservatory and into the bright, warm afternoon sunlight, leaving them entirely to the ruthless consequences of their own actions. Fast forward 6 months. I stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my Manhattan penthouse office, looking out over the sprawling city skyline. The morning sun illuminated the sleek modern space that served as the global headquarters for Melanin Crown. My beauty empire had recently acquired 3 major international distributors, cementing my brand as an untouchable titan in the global cosmetic industry. The heavy glass door to my office clicked open. Julian walked in holding a thick stack of financial reports. He was no longer the arrogant venture capitalist holding all the cards. He was now my junior business partner, respectfully reporting his quarterly metrics directly to my desk. He handed me the portfolio with a polite, deferential nod. As I reviewed his excellent profit margins, a news notification flashed across my tablet screen. It detailed the latest developments in local fraud convictions. Chloe was currently working as a cashier at a discount grocery store, while Brenda scrubbed floors on the night shift, as a janitor desperately trying to pay off their massive legal fees. The ugly duckling now proudly wears the ultimate untouchable crown. I smiled, knowing I had finally won the respect I always deserved. The overarching lesson from these tales of sweet revenge is that your true worth is never defined by those who are committed to misunderstanding you. Growing up as the family scapegoat, while a golden child is constantly praised, can create deep, lingering emotional wounds. However, genuine power comes from stepping out of that toxic shadow and building your own unshakable foundation. You cannot heal by seeking validation from a family system designed to exploit your vulnerabilities or diminish your hard-earned achievements. Instead, liberation is found in radical self-reliance, establishing firm boundaries, and achieving financial independence. When you stop trying to earn conditional love, you open the door to authentic, undeniable success. The ultimate revenge is never about bitter screaming matches or stooping to their toxic level. It is about completely outgrowing the very people who systematically underestimated you. Blood may make you relatives, but mutual respect, loyalty, and unwavering support are what forge a true family. You have every right to walk away from manipulation and build a brilliant empire on your own terms. Share your own story of overcoming toxic family dynamics in the comments below, and do not forget to like and subscribe for more empowering journeys of self-discovery.